Millions of fiber-optic drones are now changing the battlefield in Ukraine. But near Pokrovsk, the real shock is not the thin glass thread connecting the drone to the operator. The real shock is how a weapon Russia introduced first is now being used against Russia with greater speed, greater precision, and far better support behind the front. In several documented cases over recent weeks, Ukrainian fiber-guided FPVs have reached deep into Russian rear areas, hitting command posts, fuel trucks, and even small assault groups before they could form up for an attack. The same kind of strike, in the opposite direction, used to be considered Russia's strongest card in this drone race. Now that card looks weaker every month. And inside the Kremlin, this shift is treated as a sensitive topic, because admitting it openly would mean admitting that a key Russian advantage on the front line has quietly slipped away. For most of 2024, fiber-optic drones were described as Russia's answer to electronic warfare. With a hair-thin cable spooling out behind the drone, the signal could not be jammed, the frequency could not be hunted, and the operator could keep full control even deep inside a wall of Ukrainian jammers. Russia built the first large stockpiles, trained the first units, and used these systems to push Ukrainian armor and infantry back from several positions. That picture is now changing. Ukrainian fiber drones are flying further, more often, and with far more support. So why is Russia, the side that started this race, now falling behind in it? And why is the Kremlin choosing to stay silent about a problem that touches almost every active sector of the front? The idea behind a fiber-optic drone is simple, but the effects on the battlefield are not. A normal FPV drone uses radio waves to send video back to the operator and to receive control commands. Those radio waves can be jammed, blocked, or traced. Both sides in this war have built thick walls of electronic warfare that turn whole zones into dead air for radio drones. A fiber-optic drone removes that weakness in a direct way. Instead of radio, it carries a tiny spool of glass fiber. As the drone flies forward, the fiber unwinds behind it. Video and commands travel through that thread of glass at the speed of light. No jammer can break that link because there is no radio signal to attack. To the operator, it feels like flying a normal FPV drone, but inside a zone where normal drones would lose signal in seconds. Russia understood this advantage early and put real resources behind it. Russian factories began producing fiber-optic kits at scale, often by adapting cheap commercial spools and matching them to standard drone airframes. Russian units in places like Avdiivka and Vuhledar started using fiber FPVs to hit Ukrainian armor that previously sat protected behind walls of jammers. For several months, this looked like a genuine shock to Ukrainian defenders. Vehicles that had felt safe under electronic cover were suddenly being destroyed by drones that did not appear on any frequency scanner. The pattern on this battlefield seemed clear. Russia had found a way around Ukraine's electronic shield, and it had built that way at scale. But the same physics that protect the fiber drone also limit it. The spool of glass has a fixed length, usually between 10 and 20 kilometers in the newest systems. Once the fiber runs out, the drone is lost. The cable can also snag on trees, buildings, power lines, or the wreckage of vehicles. A pilot who flies too low over rough ground may cut the line by accident. A pilot who flies too high gives away the launch point, and because the drone must trail a thin glass thread behind it, the flight profile is more delicate than a radio FPV. Sharp turns, wind gusts, and complex routes all raise the risk of breaking the link. That is why fiber drones are not a simple upgrade. They are a different tool with different rules. To use them well, a unit needs trained operators, careful route planning, drone teams that can launch from protected positions, and a chain of supply that delivers tested spools, not damaged ones. It also needs reliable batteries, stable airframes, and a workshop close enough to the front to repair systems quickly. In other words, it needs a full industrial and human system behind every flight. Russia built the early stockpile, but building a stockpile is not the same as building that full system. And it is exactly this gap between hardware on a shelf and trained crews in the field where the Russian advantage began to crack. Ukraine reacted to the first wave of Russian fiber strikes in a way that has now become familiar. Engineers studied recovered Russian drones in detail. Small workshops, often run by volunteers and private companies, started producing their own fiber kits within weeks. State programs were rebuilt to push money toward the most successful designs. And, most importantly, the Ukrainian side did not treat fiber FPVs as a single magic weapon. It treated them as one layer inside a larger drone network. Because of that decision, Ukrainian fiber drones did not arrive at the front as a few prototype units. They arrived as part of an existing structure of reconnaissance, signals work, strike coordination, and damage assessment. A typical Ukrainian strike now combines a reconnaissance drone watching the target area, a radio FPV for fast targets in open ground, a fiber FPV for hardened targets inside electronic warfare zones, and a separate drone for confirming the hit. Each layer covers the weakness of the others. A radio FPV is faster and cheaper. A fiber FPV is slower but immune to jamming. A reconnaissance drone is needed to find the target in the first place, and a confirmation drone is needed to make sure resources are not wasted on a target that has already been destroyed. Russia, by contrast, often pushed fiber FPVs into units that had little time to learn them. In several documented cases, the same brigade that received new fiber kits had no separate reconnaissance support, no trained spotters, and no clear chain for resupply. The drones existed, but the system around them did not. When that happens, the weapon is wasted. A fiber drone launched without good targeting data is just an expensive way to crash a glass thread into a field. A pilot who has not flown enough hours may break the fiber on the first obstacle. A unit that does not protect its launch site can lose its drone team to counterfire before the second flight. At the same time, Ukrainian production has grown in a way that few outside observers expected. By late 2025, Ukraine appears to have been producing fiber-optic drones at a monthly pace that, in several estimates, may have matched or even passed Russian output for the same period. The exact numbers are difficult to confirm, but the visible effect on the front speaks for itself. Russian columns moving toward contact lines are now hit by fiber drones at distances where Russian jammers should have been the strongest. Russian command posts in the second line are being struck through dense forest cover. Russian fuel and ammunition trucks are being burned on routes that used to feel safe. The real shock is not that Ukrainian fiber drones exist. The real shock is how widely and how routinely they are used. Every assault group has to assume the threat. Every supply run has to plan around it. And every commander has to accept that the protection once offered by electronic warfare walls is no longer a guarantee, even 5 or 10 kilometers behind the line. That shift becomes easier to see in a single engagement. Near Pokrovsk in recent weeks, a small Russian assault group prepared to move toward a Ukrainian position along a tree line. The plan combined motorcycles, 2 light armored vehicles, and a mortar team positioned in the rear. Above the route, Russian electronic warfare systems were active, designed to cut radio signals from any incoming FPV. On paper, the route was protected. In practice, the route was already being watched. A Ukrainian reconnaissance drone, flying high and with its own radio link carefully managed, had been observing the area for hours. From that position, the structure of the unit became easier to interpret. The motorcycles were grouped in pairs. The armored vehicles followed at a fixed spacing. A small antenna mast near the rear suggested an electronic warfare vehicle, the same kind of system that was supposed to keep Ukrainian drones blind in this sector. That antenna mast became the first target. Because of the jamming wall, a normal radio FPV would have struggled to reach the antenna without losing signal. Instead, a fiber-optic FPV was launched from a protected position several kilometers back. The drone climbed low over a tree line, then turned along the planned route, with its glass fiber unspooling behind it. The pilot used the reconnaissance video as a guide, while flying through clean, unjammed video of his own. Every step of the movement was seen, measured, and turned into a target. The first strike hit the electronic warfare vehicle directly. The antenna mast collapsed, and the jamming wall in that sector went dead. That single hit changed everything. The motorcycles, now exposed, lost the radio cover that was supposed to protect them. The armored vehicles, suddenly visible to a new wave of radio FPVs, became easy targets. Within a few minutes, the assault group lost its formation. Some motorcycles tried to turn back, others scattered into open ground. A second fiber drone struck the lead armored vehicle, blocking the route. A third drone hit the rear vehicle, trapping the column. What followed was not a battle in the older sense. It was a sequence of small, precise hits, each one removing a single soldier, a single vehicle, or a single piece of equipment. The mortar team in the rear, which was supposed to support the advance, was identified by the reconnaissance drone before it could fire a single round. A fiber FPV reached it through the trees and ended the threat in a way that no jammer could have stopped. In less than 15 minutes, an assault that had been planned for hours with armor, infantry, and dedicated electronic protection collapsed into a scatter of disabled vehicles and a handful of survivors retreating on foot. The Russian unit had not been outnumbered. It had not been caught in the open by accident. It had been planned around an assumption that fiber drones were still a Russian advantage. That assumption is now under pressure. To understand why this is happening across the front, and not only in single engagements, it helps to look beyond the drones themselves. The fiber-optic drone war is not really a contest between two products. It is a contest between two systems. And the Russian system, despite an early lead in hardware, has structural weaknesses that are now showing on every active axis. The first weakness is training. A fiber FPV operator needs many flight hours to develop a feel for the cable, the turning radius, and the safe altitudes for each terrain. Ukrainian units have built dedicated training centers where new pilots fly hundreds of practice missions on simulators and on safe ranges before they ever touch the front. Russian units, in many cases, learn on the job. New operators arrive at the front with a few hours of practice and are expected to perform under fire. The result is predictable. More broken fibers, more lost drones, fewer hits per launch. The second weakness is logistics. A fiber drone is only as good as the spool it carries. A damaged spool, a poorly wound cable, or a low-quality glass fiber can break in flight, even when the pilot does everything right. Ukrainian production lines, often built around small workshops with strict quality control, have made the fiber itself more reliable. Russian production, scaled quickly through state contracts, has shown clear inconsistency. In several documented cases, entire batches of Russian fiber drones appear to have shown a high failure rate in the field, with cables breaking within the first few kilometers of flight. The third weakness is doctrine. Russian commanders, under pressure to produce results, have often used fiber drones as direct replacements for radio FPVs. They send them after the same kinds of targets, at the same kinds of distances, with the same kinds of support. But a fiber drone is not a faster FPV. It is a slower, more deliberate weapon, designed for targets that radio drones cannot reach. Using a fiber FPV against a moving motorcycle in open ground wastes the cable and the time. Using it against a hidden command post inside a jam zone is where it shines. Ukrainian units with a more decentralized command culture have been quicker to learn that lesson. Russian units with a more rigid chain of command have been slower to adjust. And there is a fourth weakness, which is harder to measure but easy to see. It is the gap between the official picture and the real one. Russian state media still describes fiber-optic drones as a clear Russian advantage. Russian factories still publish numbers showing rapid growth. But on the ground, soldiers report that Ukrainian fiber drones are now the more frequent threat in many sectors. When that gap grows, units lose trust in the equipment they are given. They begin to assume that the next box of drones will fail, and they plan around that assumption. That is a quiet kind of defeat, and it is one that no factory output number can fix. This brings the story back to the Kremlin. There is a simple reason why Russian officials avoid speaking openly about losing the fiber drone race. Admitting it would mean admitting several harder truths at once. The first truth is that Russia's early lead in this technology was not protected. Russia introduced fiber-optic FPVs first and could have built a long-term advantage. Instead, the design was copied, improved, and scaled by an opponent that Moscow describes as weaker, smaller, and dependent on foreign support. To accept this in public would force a question that the Kremlin does not want to answer. If a weaker opponent can match and surpass Russian production in a key drone category within a year, what what does that say about the wider Russian war industry? The second truth is that the gap is not only about machines, it is also about people. Ukrainian drone teams are often built around volunteers, private companies, and small units with real independence to test and adjust. Russian drone teams are built inside a vertical system where requests for new equipment, new training, and new tactics travel slowly through layers of command. A modern drone war rewards speed of learning. A vertical system slows learning by design. That is why fiber-optic drones, which depend on operator skill and rapid adjustment, are a particularly painful weapon for a rigid command structure. The third truth is about the picture given to the Russian public. For more than a year, state media has presented drone warfare as a Russian strength. Reports show Russian operators destroying Ukrainian armor, hitting trenches, and breaking through electronic walls. To suddenly admit that the same kinds of strikes are now landing in the opposite direction, deeper and more often, would damage the careful narrative that has been built around the war. The Kremlin prefers stories of steady progress, not stories of a technological race being lost. So instead, the topic is handled quietly. Fiber drones are mentioned, but not compared. Numbers are released, but not matched against Ukrainian numbers. The loss is hidden inside the silence. The fourth truth is the most difficult. Russia is fighting a long war and depending on its ability to outproduce, outlast, and outscale Ukraine. The fiber-optic drone race is a direct test of that idea. It is a category where Russia had every early advantage: larger factories, easier access to commercial parts, a first-mover position in the technology. If Russia cannot hold a lead even there, then the broader assumption that scale alone will win the war becomes harder to defend. Admitting the loss in fiber drones means admitting that the deeper Russian strategy may not be working as planned, and that is a conversation no senior Russian official wants to start in public. This points to a deeper shift on today's battlefield. The fiber-optic drone race is not really about glass cables. It is about which side can learn faster, adjust faster, and turn small ideas into mass production faster. In the past, a country that built a new weapon first could expect a comfortable lead for years. Tanks, aircraft, missiles, all of these moved through long cycles with secrets that took time to copy. Now that cycle is measured in months, sometimes in weeks. A new drone design used on one side of the front can be reverse engineered, improved, and produced on the other side before the original maker has even finished its second batch. This is no longer just a story about Russia and Ukraine. It is becoming a story about how modern wars will be fought between any two industrial powers. The advantages that used to come from size, factories, and budget are still important, but they no longer guarantee victory by themselves. A smaller side that can learn quickly, decentralize its decisions, and connect engineers directly with operators on the front can match or beat a larger side that moves through slow, vertical chains of command. That lesson is being studied in capitals far from Ukraine. The pattern on this battlefield is clear. Hardware alone does not decide the drone war. The system around the hardware decides it. That system includes training centers, repair workshops, secure supply lines, reliable software, fast feedback from the front, and a culture that allows small teams to test new ideas without waiting for permission. Where that system exists, even a thin glass fiber becomes a precise weapon that can change the shape of an entire sector. Where that system is weak, even the largest stockpile of drones becomes a pile of expensive boxes that do not turn into results. For Russia, the gap is no longer hidden inside one or two engagements. It is visible across the front, in the daily reports of strikes that reach further into the rear than before, in the loss of equipment that was once considered safe, and in the growing pressure on routes that used to be quiet. For Ukraine, the same gap is a fragile advantage that depends on continued production, continued training, and continued protection of the workshops where these drones are made. And for everyone watching from outside, this is a clear preview of how future wars will look, where the side with the faster learning loop, not the largest army, may decide the outcome. This raises a larger question about what comes next. The cold lesson here is simple. The Russian advantage in fiber-optic drones, once treated as a stable feature of the war, has quietly slipped away. Not because Russia stopped producing them, but because Ukraine learned faster, built better systems around them, and turned a single weapon into part of a wider network. The Kremlin's silence does not change that. It only delays the moment when the public picture has to catch up with the frontline reality. So, what comes next? Will Russia rebuild its lead by reforming training, logistics, and command around the drone war? Or will the gap continue to widen, sector by sector, until fiber-optic drones become another category quietly dominated by the Ukrainian side? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this analysis was useful, like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more clear coverage on the weapons, battles, and politics shaping today's war.